The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed in the podcast belong solely to the hosts and not the host's past, present, or future employers. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is Brian for Breaking Down Security. This week is part 2 of our discussion with Tony Robinson, DA_667 on Twitter. This week, our discussion continues with setting up a home lab. We get into discussing different tools, different ways of setting up labs. Not only for your own education, but let's say you're using it as part of being a contractor or a consultant, where you're having to learn something to ramp up for an engagement, or you're doing bug bounties, so you need to have a lab that you can test potential software on, like WordPress, or maybe you're doing mobile app testing and you need a lab with a rooted device on it. So we talk about how you might set these labs up, tools that you might use for network forensics, and we get into a lot of good discussion on not just logs and forensics, but also incident response type items as well. So hope everyone has a great week, and we'll talk to you again soon. Yeah. So one of the things that I was thinking about, when I was looking at your book was, what is the audience who would want to buy your book? And one of the few things I thought of was people trying to upskill, trying to change roles to get into more security based, moving from IT potentially, or trying to, just curious about, doing things at home. Our friend Ponysec, does a lot of bug bounty stuff. So I was like, well, that would definitely benefit him having a home lab to be able to, run through web applications or mobile apps or something like that, to be able to find bug bounties, for instance. Or if you're an independent consultant, you may need a lab if you're working on a gig and you need to be able to have a test environment and the company doesn't have one available, or it's not easy to get to. You may also be a junior pen tester or consultant for a company and looking to make a promotion. So, along with upskilling, you would, be able to show your work, or be able to, work through various things to gain a promotion. So definitely see that. So, in your opinion, other than the book cost, what you mentioned hardware, and I would imagine that was probably the most expensive part of setting up a lab, is just getting that if you didn't already have some items. So from your point of view, and it's probably in the book, but just for everybody's edification here who doesn't have it in front of them, what is one of the easier ways of finding devices that you could potentially run labs on?
Well, it's hilarious that you mentioned it. I do cover that in the book, and I'm not making any assumptions that anybody has it in front of them, but check the end of, if you are looking at this later on, check the end of chapter 6. That's where I go over, here's like the recommended requirements for setting up the lab environment. Here's the baseline that you are going to end up with at the end of the book. And later on, we talk about how you can recustomize it or reconfigure it from there. But strictly talking hardware, I've made all sorts of recommendations. If you live in a college town or close to one, you might be able to get surplus hardware from the college. eBay is always an option. Not everybody enjoys it, but there's also nobody really particularly enjoys Craigslist, but the option is there because it's a local option and you can actually see the hardware before you acquire it. There are resellers out there such as Save My Server, ServerMonkey, Natex.us. There are electronics recycling organizations who might be able to sell you surplus desktops, laptops, or servers before they go to scrap them. So long as you're able to meet the minimum requirements, you should be able to do it on any hardware you can come up with. And that's the overall goal that I wanted to come up with, to say, like, there are many places you can get it. If you want to get cheap hardware, this is where you go. But if you want to run it on custom hardware like Intel NUCs, or if you had a laptop, you just need to meet the requirements and you're good to go.
Right. Right. So you mentioned requirements. What would be what does it take to have a minimum viable lab in this case? Let's say I mean, the requirements would be different for a mobile application versus a web app. Let's say it's you're wanting to test a network setup for a network security.
So that's one of the things that the baseline lab is actually somewhat good at. I tried to make the baseline lab, or like this is the meat of the book itself, is setting up a baseline configuration. And I define that as being our lab defines a pincushion virtual machine that's vulnerable to everything. It's metasploitable too. We have a Kali Linux VM for penetration testing tools. There's a system on the network that I have students either configure Snort or Suricata, Snort 3 or Suricata, and have that set up as a inline packet sniffing bridge. So that's what we would call a fail-close bridge. You can turn that off and it instantly drops connectivity between a set of network segments. So you can instantly segment off a network if you think something's going wrong with it, or if you want to isolate it immediately without, risking any other issues coming up. So that's Metasploitable. That's Kali. That's the Snort Suricata virtual machine. We have another virtual machine that is dedicated to running Splunk or another SIM of your choice. And we have the pfSense VM that's responsible for doing network segmentation. And from your perspective, testing network connectivity or doing network forensics, that would be a perfect use case for the Snort and Suricata virtual machine in the middle. By default, I have students configure Snort or Suricata, and then we have log forwarding configured to send that over to the Splunk VM. And even as a test case towards the end of the book, I say, here's the Metasploitable VM and here's the Kali Linux VM. Do something crazy like throw Nikto at it and see what IDS results you get. But in a different world, maybe you want to try testing out your own Snort or Suricata rules, and you want to see if your rules will trigger on certain traffic. And that's another perfectly viable use case for that. Write your rule, add it to the Snort or Suricata configuration file, and use curl, or you can use Scapy, or you can use other packet crafting tools to make that packet or make that data or that payload and see if it triggers an IDS alert. So nice. That was a great example to go on, actually, because network forensics is most of my background. So that's basically what the baseline environment is best at.
Cool. Okay. All right. So, Mr. Betcher, I know you are a big fan of doing things like malware analysis. You have a tool yourself that you also use for, configuring systems for log analysis and collection. What does your lab look like, Mr. Betcher, when you were doing malware analysis?
Mine was a physical system that I had a bunch of scripts on. And what you would do is you would infect the box with malware that you had captured or wanted to test. Like, for example, if you download it from VirusTotal or whatnot. And then you would let LogMD do its thing, right? To see what exactly the malware did on the system. This system was pre-configured because by default, Windows logs almost nothing. Right. So you have to set your audit policies and various things like that, do a baseline of the registry to see if the registry changes at any time. So it'll do a registry diff for you. And it would also do a baseline and hash every file on the system so that just in case something like state level went on, then after the malware did its thing, you would run through every file on the system to see if any file changed, any file was added or deleted or whatnot. So you've got full hard drive registry and looking at the logs as well as all the processes. It would do a static and dynamic process analysis.
Right.
So yeah, it would hit all the key things there.
Okay. So we're not rich like you, Mr. Betcher. So would you run anything like a sandbox or anything on that box, or multiple VMs, or you're just one box, one infection? How would you collect the artifacts on an already infected box? Would you have it in an internal environment like what Tony has that would collect that data off the device itself, or how do you get forensics on an already infected device in that respect?
Typically, it's in the logs. Yeah, I would have a different hard drive to collect all the data. And yeah,
okay.
If the box was infected, then I would collect all the data that I had. I could de-infect it at that point because I knew where the malware was, what it was communicating with. So I would kill the processes that the malware was, and then I could do whatever I wanted, reinfect it if I needed to, or restart the process, that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. So Tony, that's definitely one way of doing it. Being completely, physical. You're speaking more towards the virtual side. So you're, what was your specific, VM type system of choice? Did you use VirtualBox? You mentioned VMware Fusion earlier in your story, but are there any ones that you specifically, think are good for starters of their home labs?
Well, for the most part, I recommend VirtualBox as the starter hypervisor for most people. And most people, most professional, I'll say, why would you do that? VirtualBox sucks. Well, most of the times when you have professionals involved, they can afford a VMware Workstation license or a VMware Fusion license, or maybe they have a little bit more experience and are willing to deal with the intricacies of installing ESXi and it being so picky about its hardware. Mm-hmm. But the main benefit of VirtualBox is that it runs on everything. It runs on Mac OS, it runs on BSD, it runs on Linux, it runs on Windows. And for the most part, people have told me that it has issues with crashing, but either I've been extremely lucky or I have incredibly stable hardware, because in the, 4 or 5 years that I've been writing and rewriting all this material, I've had maybe one virtual machine pull a guru meditation, which is VirtualBox's slang for the VM crashed and I couldn't save it. That's what they call their crashes. So I've only had that happen like maybe 1 or 2 times. I mean, it's somewhat limited as a hypervisor, but it's the easiest available option. And not only that, it's free. So I typically recommend that. But if they're looking for, say, a bare metal hypervisor, I almost always recommend ESXi, even though it is a bit of a pain to get hardware that's compatible with it. More often than not, most people will just tell you buy a used Dell or an HP server or a Super Micro server and put it on that hardware, because 9 times out of 10, it will have the Intel network interface cards and the storage controllers that are compatible with ESXi right out the gate, instead of having to do really weird, finicky things to get it to work. Okay.
All right. So I'll ask both of you, see if you have different answers. But so a lot of people set up these home labs because they think, well, I'm going to do bug bounties, but, hey, I want to get and be cool and do malware analysis. And that brings its a whole other level of crap. And Mr. Betcher, he does it on physical device, but how, if I don't know if the book goes into this, and where would what are good ways of getting access to malware other than just clicking on every email you get from somebody trying to give you your UPS invoice or whatever? Are there places that you highlight in your book about where you can go and get potential malware stuff, malware samples, or other than making them yourself? And I'll Tony, and then I'll ask Mr. Betcher.
Well, I don't go into that on the book of myself, and that kind of goes off into, we had this lovely discussion at CSEC. What would I do if I had $1 million and all the time in the world? I would spin off a malware analysis book and say, these are all the cool places where you can get samples. But since y'all are here with us tonight, if you have all the money in the world already, or your provider is providing or is covering for you, Virus Total Intelligence, download it there.
Okay.
You could go through Malware Bazaar is another wonderful resource available. VX Underground, they have all sorts of different samples, and they're constantly updating their library and their write-ups with regards to different types of malware. Those are usually primary sources. And then I want to say Florian Roth had a group of social media posters that he threw together into a list. And a lot of them are researchers that will say, I found this sample on this open directory at this IP address. And they'll even have like the hashtag on social media open directory. And they'll say these samples or these types of malware were found here. You can go and download them. The site's still live. It hasn't been kicked off yet. And as a final option, and again, none of this is in the book, so y'all are getting a treat tonight. Honeypots, of course. If you can run honeypots, if you can emulate services accurately, or if you just, in some cases, are just running a server and literally just have RDP running, or if you have a vulnerable version of Microsoft Exchange, you can see what the bad guys are attempting to exploit, and if they exploit, what they're dropping to disk. Right. Those are my primary sources, or where I usually recommend most people to get live samples if they have the ability.
Very cool. Mr. Betcher, how about you? Where do you go for your favorite samples? I mean, other than, where you work or, whatever.
Yeah, typically it's where I work, but yeah.
Not by design.
That's right.
I clicked on this email. Says I love you.
It's amazing when you get your employees to send you all their phishing emails. Right?
Oh, yes.
When they say, "Oh crap, this is a phishing email," and they send it to you, and you're like, "Oh, sweet, this is what I got to play with today."
Right.
And you get the latest stuff that way. We have gotten samples that hadn't hit Virus Total yet. This is where we downloaded our Michael and I, our Drydex sample that was really good. That was probably the best one we've had in quite some time since before since he was in the gaming industry and got his copy of the one that was published a few months later by Kaspersky.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's where you get the good stuff is through if you can set up a place where your employees can send you all their phish emails, that would be amazing. You get all kinds of stuff that way. And then I think you mentioned one that I visited quite often to just download samples. And then another place you can get them is when you read about the latest attacks on blog posts and stuff. Sometimes they'll have a link so that you can download the malware. And then a Virus Total, of course. But I think to download malware from Virus Total, you need a license.
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning. Virus Total Intelligence. Like a lot of the times, it's god awful expensive. But if your employer or if you are independently wealthy and gave you a license for that, it's an invaluable resource because not only do you get the download, you get the metadata that came with it. Like, was this submitted through the VT API? Was it submitted through a web browser? What country did it come from? What was the first date it was submitted? What was the last date it was submitted? So you might get ideas as to whether or not this is an active campaign, a campaign that's just firing up, or one that's been around for a long time. So, I mean, it's an expensive resource, but in this case, you sort of get what you pay for.
Right. Okay. One that I actually like, I tend to follow people on Twitter. Malware_traffic is a decent
Oh my God, Brad
Twitter
Duncan. I
handle.
can't believe I forgot him. He is amazing. As a matter of fact, he is one that I do recommend in the book if you're looking for starting exercises, because he lines up everything. He has a bunch of those training exercises. And then for his actual reports, here's the PCAP, here's the sample, here's all of the other stuff that got dropped to disk, here's everything that it does. And I'm just like, you're doing this for free? You've been doing this for years, man. This is great.
Yeah, 2 days ago, I just posted a link in our show notes to that. He's talking about, CACbot or QBot infection with Cobalt Strike, doing reconnaissance activity with Bloodhound, IOCs with links. So he puts, screenshots along with, screenshots of the tripwire along with URLs, sometimes where you can just download the exe.gif.jpeg.pdfs or whatever the hell it is, and then a PCAP of that file. So there's a link. All Unit 42 also looks like another good place. Another Unit 42_intel. Is another good Twitter handle that I tend to follow. I add those links when I see them coming across to our Threat Intel channel. And we have a couple of folks on our Threat Intel channel, Riot and Exempt, and those in our Slack that also will tend to say, okay, here's a malicious link to something that is available. We do put out disclaimers that that's actual shite, so do not download that and look at it on your work computers, for instance. So yeah, there's definitely a multitude of places just for malware analysis to go to. Tony, you mentioned honeypots, which is a great thing. So you're going to set this lab up, and it's like, I was asking what the goal was here. And I guess that's another thing. It'd be like, I want to set up a honeypot because, I have this old version of Exchange 5.5 and I want to expose it to the internet because I want people to attack it and I can, monitor that stuff. How do you protect yourself from being infected as well? What are some of the ways to manage ingress and egress so that you're not because your home lab is typically in your home, which normally has a flat environment. So the last thing you want to do is infect, your Roku box or all your IoT devices or what have you. So how do you yourself keep yourself from being infected in the greater network?
Well, that's one of the big things that I took a look at when I was designing the baseline lab environment. That's why there's both the pfSense firewall that handles like the core network traffic, the segmentation, network services, all of the traditional stuff that you'd expect on a firewall. But that's also why there are these segments that are kind of tied together or bridged through that Snort or Suricata virtual machine that I mentioned earlier as well. The idea is that also in chapter 6, there's like a whole network diagram that kind of lays this out, but there are two network segments that are bridged together through that Snort and Suricata VM, IPS1 and IPS2. The idea in the baseline lab is that you would put the Kali Linux virtual machine on IPS1, that network segment, and then on the secondary IPS2 network segment is where the Metasploitable VM would be. And as a part of like testing it out and making sure that it works, in addition to getting your IDS alerts, I tell the students, turn off the Snort or the Suricata service, or just unplug or turn on or power off the virtual machine, see if you can still connect to it, and giving them, this is what fail close networking is. If this system isn't up, the network segment where you would have the Metasploitable VM can't talk to anything. And then on top of that, you have these really hard or solid pfSense firewall rules that say you're not allowed to talk to any other RFC 1918 addresses. You're only allowed to communicate outbound on these ports. You're only allowed to talk to the pfSense VM if you want DNS, if you want DHCP, or if you want NTP services. You're not allowed to talk to anything else in any of the other network segments or on the network that it's attached to. So I was really, really meticulous about those rules and tried to design it to kind of make it as safe as possible. We all work in security and we all know that there's nothing that is 100% safe. And I always make sure to, tell the students, be extremely careful when you're doing this. If you notice anything going wrong, don't be afraid to rip the power immediately. It's better to be safe than sorry.
Right.
So that's kind of how I go about it, is I very heavily rely on both that fail close networking and the firewall to cover security gaps and make sure that things stay inside that network. And that IPS2 network where I was saying, the Metasploitable 2 virtual machine, that would be where, instead of maybe running Metasploitable 2, that would be where you would be running your Windows Server trials, or where you'd be running your virtual machines that you got from modern.ie, or your boot to root virtual machines. That's the stuff that you want to interact with in your lab environment, but you don't want to have touching anything else outside of your networks,
right?
Or outside of your virtual networks. So
and I think
that's the whole concept there.
Yeah, no, and absolutely. Yeah. And you mentioned modern.ie. That's something that we've known about for, 5-6 years.
It's so good. It's so good.
Free 90-day Windows devices. They, you can go in and download a build that lasts for 90 days. And you can use it for, it's fully functional as far as I know. And you can, the idea is you're supposed to be testing browsers, but it's, an IE10 version with, I think IE11, but you can install pretty much anything on it you want. But it's definitely helpful and useful for testing and that. And I remember going through Sec 504, and that was being mentioned as a potential resource for your home labs. So Tony, what do you do in your lab?
Well, my lab is, you ever hear the phrase, the cobbler's children have no shoes?
Yeah.
Let me tell you a thing or two about the cobbler's children not having shoes, man. For everybody else, if you're millennial and you never heard that phrase before or whatever, it's the idea that I tell you guys how to do a really good job, but my lab's a mess right now. And that's because I've got reproductions of this lab environment across 5 different hypervisors on 3 different sets of hardware. Let me just tell you what my lab looks like right now. I'm vastly outnumbered by the machines, guys. I've got a Windows 10 laptop here that I have running headless. And by that, I just mean that I have it set up to work and run with the head, or with the screen pulled down. That's running my Hyper-V virtual machines, most of my VirtualBox virtual machines. Any hypervisor that's running on Windows that the book covers, I ran it on that.
Nice.
I got my workplace's VMware Fusion, or a laptop that I am running VMware Fusion on. Just to set up the baseline lab environment, and just to say that I cover Mac OS users, which I will never, ever do again. More on that later. And then I've got 2 ESXi virtual machine servers sitting in the basement. One of them was a home build server that I threw together a couple of years ago that still survives to this day. And the other one was an extremely generous donation by a gentleman who shall remain anonymous because he never told me his name. He sent me a 50-pound server through the mail and didn't ask for anything. Okay. And this guy was just incredibly helpful. So I've got those, and then I've got the Raspberry Pi for one of the routing and remote access chapters, to where I tell students, this is how you set up SSH access to your virtual machines. And if you ran this on ESXi, here's how to do SSH tunneling, and here's how you can do it through a Raspberry Pi or through an additional virtual machine that you set up, or something along those lines, or maybe another physical box that you have set up and you want to route the traffic and tunnel it through that. Right. So there's the Raspberry Pi, there's 2 laptops, there's my work desktop, and then I've got 2 servers in the basement, and my local utility DT&E loves me. I'll tell you what.
Maybe you should install some solar panels.
So to answer your question, things are kind of a mess right now. It's a little bit disheveled, but I do a good job with housekeeping and making sure that, I'm not at least like leaving any of them running with malware or leaving any of them with awful firewall rules configured. At the very least, I do keep them all cordoned and segmented and cleared out, or at the very least powered off if I'm not using them, Oh,
that's good.
So okay. The cobbler's children don't have shoes, but I'm doing the best I can. They got sandals right now.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Mr. Betcher, do you have any other questions? I have a few more, and then I think we can wrap it up. But I don't want to hog.
No, I don't think so. Go ahead.
Okay, so a lot of people do home labs for different reasons. You mentioned network forensics. I've mentioned malware. I was thinking along the lines of there's 80 Brazilian IoT type devices out there. You may want to get into some IoT hacking for whatever reason. Do you have tools like soldering irons or oscilloscopes or, tools that would allow you to do, say, JTAG re-implementation on a device, or have any cell phones that you might do mobile app testing on, for instance, that are rooted?
So I'll be honest with you, and I'll say that most of that stuff falls outside of my wheelhouse. I have a fascination with hardware hacking. And most people I see do write-ups for various IoT devices and or routers, from various vendors. Whenever I see them, I pulled down the latest firmware update. I managed to analyze it. I figured out how they had it compressed, how they had it configured, and I mounted the file system and found out that they're running an ancient version of mini HTTPD or something, and figured out how they can exploit the system. I always find those write-ups fascinating, but in terms of, getting JTAG headers and figuring out how to dump firmware, how to hardware hacking in general is outside of my wheelhouse. I don't have the experience to do it, but if you have firmware images, the lab is just as well set up to analyze firmware images as it would be for, say, malware. It's kind of the same thing. You have
right.
I know that sounds weird to say, but it's an unusual file. It's an unusual format, and you're trying to figure out what the functionality is at a core level. They're somewhat similar. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's capable of doing those things. But as far as my skill set's concerned, I'm not going to be taking soldering irons to anything unless it's burning myself these days.
Okay. Yeah. No, I was just wondering, and you don't necessarily have to have those devices. I was just thinking along the lines of because when I was way back in the day, some of you were not even born then, I was trying to attempt to become a CCNA, a Cisco certified network admin. So,
hey, I got that.
I tried. I think I went through a night course when I was in the Navy, which shows you how long ago it was. And they were like, well, you just have to buy this, 5, Cisco 1500, series routers, and, put them all together and run the OSPF and the router rips and all that stuff. And I was like, there's got to be a cheaper way. So I found this program called GNS3, which is actually still out there and being run. Graphical Networks. It's Graphical Network service something. Anyway, it will load firmware up for you, run kind of like in a hypervisor. I believe it uses VirtualBox or Box, BOCHS, whichever, and emulate firmware routers, and you can actually use it in coordination with VirtualBox to route traffic between VMs. I've actually seen many how-tos on how to do that. And it's not hard to find ISOs of firmware online. I won't tell you how to Google dork that, but you can definitely Google dork that and find ISOs of various router firmwares. Not hard. But yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of, if somebody wanted to do that. I know that there are numerous, how-tos out there, but I just wondered what kind of specific toolings you have in your environment. I'm sure you're a big fan of Wireshark and those as well when you're doing network analysis and forensics.
For the most part, Wireshark is one of my favorite network forensics tools. Occasionally, once in a good while, I'll use forgot what was it, T-Shark. T-Shark is the text-based interface. One of the more interesting things I used to do when I worked in a SOC was we would get IDS alerts frequently for BitTorrent downloads, and we used to get DMCA notices from companies all over the place.
Right.
So a really fun thing is that when you get snort alerts and you enable packet logging for that alert, the part of the alert that triggers, they download the packet that includes the hash ID for the torrent. And the hash ID for the torrent is basically a SHA-256 of the file you're trying to download or the name of the torrent. So I used to tell when I was working with SourceFire gear, or I was working with my network gear, I'd say, download all of these. I want to see all the packets. I want you to rip them through T-Shark. I want you to pull out the hash ID, give me all of the hashes, and then I would just one by one go through Google and figure out which IP address on the internal network was downloading this and what the torrent actually was. And like 9 times out of 10, it was stuff like CW's The Flash, or it would be like Batman versus Superman or something like that. And I'd just be like, man, you guys must be killing time. This must be this must be like the guard post or something. They must be killing like time for the night shift or something. It's like, a lot of the times, like everybody goes immediately towards they're going towards the adult content, aren't they? It's like you're downloading. No, not surprisingly not. No, they just want to kill time watching other stuff that shouldn't be pirated.
Right.
But that's like a perfect example of some of the crazy stuff that T-Shark's really good at, is like piping through those packets and just saying, I want these headers, I want these fields, and pull all of that out. Obviously I'm a big fan of both Snort and Suricata. A lot of my background is in network forensics, and I kind of realized that saying that you're a fan of these tools in this day and age is kind of pointless, because everything uses SSL. It's getting much harder to find traffic that is plain text. But at the same time, you still get information about what type of applications are going over the wire. A lot of these IDS suites also include something similar to NetFlow records. You get HTTP request data. You get, kind of like a correlation to figure out what kind of app it is. You might get additional like contextual data for like protocol headers, like that might tell you that this was an SSH2 connection, or that this might have been a connection from an SSH client that's trying to automatically brute force you. I've seen that with Honeypots before, where like they're doing the handshake, and it'll tell you that this was libSSH, and anytime you see libSSH, it's a part of a brute force suite. But those are still useful things that NSM tools can tell you. And I just overall enjoy the experience of trying to figure out, well, what's causing this communication, and then trying to get on the client side and pull any kind of host records or any kind of host data we can get from that IP address at that point. It's kind of all a big puzzle to me. Network Miner is another fun one. If you play with Wireshark a lot, I'd recommend giving Network Miner a go. It kind of automates all of the same things that Wireshark does. There's a pay version and there's a free version. They kind of limit how much data you can pull out of it, but Network Miner will automatically try and detect what files are in a PCAP, and it will try to pull them out. It automates some of the file carving process for you.
Very nice. Okay. Cool. All right. So yeah, we one of the other things I think we talked about before we started here, I was out for a walk listening to Risky Business, and they were talking about Patch Tuesday for Windows, and then they call it Reversing Wednesday. Metal Storm would call it Reversing Wednesday. So they would take the patches from, the downloaded from every month and take a look at the original versus what they've patched to try to find, where the vulnerabilities were for those things. So that's another thing you could do with the modern.ie implementation. Obviously whatever version is going to be on there may have, over a year's worth of updates, but you would be able to eventually do some diffing on that once you downloaded it to make it happen. So there's a link in the notes on how to extract and diff MS patches. So there you can go get that. The last question that I have, and I'm going to ask Mr. Betcher first because he's a filthy manager, kind of like myself now. Mr. Betcher, you just started a new position. We won't talk about where, but congratulations, sir. So you're building out a team. So you're building out a team and you're doing interviews, and somebody says, I'm really interested in doing security. I don't have a lot of experience in security, but I have a home lab. And, I bought this guy. His name is Tony Robinson. I don't know if you know him, but his book was really helpful in me, getting my lab set up. And I've been doing all this stuff. And so for you as a person who would be hired, oh, look, he's all blushing over here. So if I was coming to you, Mr. Betcher, and I was like, hey, I don't have a lot of experience in security, but, I have this home lab and I'm doing a lot of awesome stuff. How would somebody sell that to, and I don't say sell as in like it's good, that there's no value in making a home lab, but proving that that I know what I'm doing because I've, done the necessary, I'm doing all this stuff on the side. Obviously I'm hungry and, I love security. I want to do this. For you as a hiring manager, what would you need to see from me to kind of, get that next level? And he's like, hey, you know what? He really knows what he's talking about. He's able to do what's necessary. And he really has the fire in their belly for security.
Yeah, I would start poking and prodding as to, what they were trying to do, how much they got into it, and how much passion they have for security. Like if they built this lab on a Windows system, what were they trying to do? What were they looking for? What was their goal? Right? Were they just building it to build it so they could have something to put on their resume, or were they actually generally interested in what did they learn, right, by building it, and what are some of the goals that they achieved? Right. Yeah. So it's not really one thing I'm looking for, but if they can answer questions related to what they built, right, and what they were trying to accomplish. Metasploitable. Okay. Did you hack that using Metasploit, and what name like 4 or 5 different attacks that you used, and that sort of thing. Right.
Okay. All right. So Tony, I'm trying to use this as, I'm trying to get hired. So, trying to build my case for, I want to do this. If I was to ask you this question, hey, I'm trying to get an infosec. I bought your book. It's really awesome. Thank you for making it. What are some of the tips that, me as a budding infosecian type person, say I come from IT, or, I'm in compliance and I really want to do more pen testing because, I saw the movie Black Hat and, I'm all in on Mr. Robot. So I want to be a pen tester. What does the home lab, what can I do in my home lab, and how can I showcase the talents and the things that I've learned in the home lab that would give me a leg up in a potential, junior position, or a SOC analyst, or, incident response, person?
Well, kind of to play on Mr. Vetcher's scenario, it's kind of the same thing here. The first thing I would say is like if they are that excited about Mr. Robot or Black Hat or any of that, like, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? I would be the first to tell them, like, pen testing isn't all hacking the Gibson. It's a lot of report writing. It's a lot of meeting with customers. It's a lot of being personable, as it is with data forensics and incident response. And in some cases, malware analysis. You have to be willing to submit reports and say, this is the threat that you're facing, so getting that all out of the way, which, all of us are familiar with that, but getting all of that out of the way, it's okay. You've managed to set up the baseline lab environment. And I've even gone so far as to say, if you want to bootstrap a malware analysis lab or a pen testing lab, or if you wanted to get further into ops and IT spaces and maybe play around with containers, or maybe play around with tools like Ansible or SaltStack or things like that, I've recommended resources for those. How have you customized this further? Can you document a network diagram? If you were going the penetration testing route, can you list any boot to root virtual machines that you might have played with on the network? What tools did you use? Have you played around with Cobalt Strike or other alternative command and control networks to see what they look like? Or command and control applications and programs to see how they work, what sort of communication protocols they use, how they can be reconfigured. What experience do you have with those different boot to root VMs? Did you do any write-ups? Did you do any reports with them? And that would kind of be the same kind of stuff I would ask for the data forensics and or malware analysis stuff. Have you looked at any of the training exercises that were recommended, like malware unicorns, RE 101 and 102 classes? Did you take away any core? Did you take any away of the core lessons there? Did you get anything out of them? Did you look at any of Brad Duncan's malware traffic analysis exercises? Were you able to complete them successfully? Were there things that tripped you up? Although I'm not a manager myself, one of the more interesting things that I got involved in was actually a phone call, hiring another guy to join our SOC when I worked at a previous employer. And I asked them, I give you a malware sample that I have no idea what it does. I'm handing it to you. What's the first thing that you're doing? And they immediately said, they said in the interview was submitting it to VirusTotal. And all of us here know that that's an OPSEC failure. Right, first and foremost. So asking questions like that, what's your thought process? Because most of us who do malware analysis know that there's a couple of different ways or a couple of different directions you can take malware analysis. Like Mr. Betcher prefers to do analysis on a physical system because, then you don't have to deal with anti-VM issues with certain malware samples. But what are you doing when you first get that sample? Collecting the file name, collecting metadata. Is it signed? Is it a Linux or Mac OS or Windows sample? What's the file size? Do you have PE hashes? Do you have imp hashes? Have you loaded, PE Studio to see if there's any other interesting information in it? Have you tried doing strings dumps? Is it obfuscated? Have you tried submitting the hash to a database like VirusTotal or Malware Bazaar or those places? Those are the kind of things that, like, if you're asking, what do you do when you first get a sample and what's your thought process? And if they can tell you those kind of things, those are like, he's learned a thing or two. He's picked up on this and he's actually been studying it really hard. At least that's my perspective. Feel free to correct me if either of you guys want to.
No, I think that's perfect. And Tony, I know you probably sit in when your company's hiring for new positions. So you would potentially run up against somebody very similar to this, not just from a hiring manager point of view, but you would be somebody who would be giving input as to whether or not the person would be a good hire, I would imagine. So if they came up and said, hey, I've got this home lab, I don't know if you know this guy, Tony Robinson, but he's, pretty cool. And I've used his book and whatever. So yeah, I could definitely see, where that might actually work. I would also suggest that they do OPSEC on whoever they're interviewing with. That way they have some potential common ground, or they know, oh, it's that Tony Robinson, who wrote that book. So he may actually know what he's talking about, and not just, so yeah.
I will say, it's not to toot my own horn. I hate doing that. It kind of feels weird to me, but like whenever I hear from, I've heard from a couple of different individuals through social media, they'll reach out to me as like, hey, I got my job and I want you to know that your book had a lot to do with that. I did a lot of training to get here, or I talked about the book and I talked about how I customized my lab. And a couple of weeks later, I got my training, and I'm usually first to tell them, like, my book didn't get you anywhere. You did that on your own. But that's cool. Really happy that you managed to get there, and I'm really thankful that that it's coming in handy for the community. Because I didn't write the book to get rich. I'm not making much in the way of royalties off, especially off the color copies, man. Let me tell you, Amazon loves to charge you. But I did it because I needed a place to put everything in this paper mache brain of mine. And hopefully, it being all in one place is a net benefit for the community, a nice reference resource to come back to once in a while.
Yep. Don't let him fool you, folks. He's doing this podcast on the deck of his yacht. So yeah, he's making fat. He's making fat loot, and No, I'm just kidding. I don't have anything else. I do appreciate your time. We are so far over. I almost assume we're going to make this a 3-parter, sadly, because there's just so much great content here. Before we go, I just want to get your contact information. Tony, how would people find you online if they wanted to reach out and give you kudos about the book or feedback, or hopefully it's all positive? How would they find you?
Well, as far as the book is concerned, if you picked it up through LeanPub, I think there is an email the author option on LeanPub that you can send feedback to me. It actually will say a reader had this to say about me, and then I can choose to reply back to that, and talk to you directly. My social media handle is DA_667 on Twitter. I am extremely too active on there. And I apologize in advance if you decide to come my way. But
Nice.
As much as a jerk or as much as a nerd as I may seem to be on social media, I am extremely attentive to any of my students who use my books. So if you have problems, I want to solve them and I want to help you progress your career. So those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me. Or if you got a physical copy of the book through Amazon, leave a review. I always responded to any of the critiques that had issues or any of the problems that people had with the books, and I'm happy to solve your problems wherever you're at. So
awesome.
Those are the best ways to get a hold of me.
Okay. And you mentioned students. Do you teach classes at all?
Well, it's weird. Like a lot of people, like when they write the books and that they consider that they'll refer to people reading the book as readers. I call them students.
Okay.
But also a part of that is because I do have a little bit of video content. The video content that I based on this book, I had a deal with Chris Sanders and I submitted my content to networkdefense.io. The stuff there is based off of the first book right now. I'm working on updating it and, having it benefit from the new book content and all of that. But it's force of habit from having been on there for so long and recording video content. So I just have a habit of calling my readers students.
Fantastic. Okay. So networkdefense.io is where you can find some videos. And of course, Chris Sanders has got some excellent.
If my stuff is outdated, for the love of God, Chris Sanders' work is amazing. All of the other people who have submitted stuff there's a lovely class on Sigma. There is there are quite a few classes, the threat hunting course, I want to say, I forgot what the other one was that I took, but I'm starting to sound like a commercial and I'm already an instructor there. So I don't want you to think that I'm trying to sell you anything. So if you have half a mind to do any of that stuff or see those classes, they're all amazing. Just give it a look. If the stuff that I made out there isn't to your tastes, there's plenty of other stuff out there.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you. And of course, they can find you on Twitter. I know you, I've been following you for several years now. You always have some good content on there. So they can go check you out over there. So thank you for
in advance. I am so sorry in advance.
No, I appreciate it. And I do appreciate your time being taken out here for both coming to my local meetup here virtually and coming on the podcast. So I appreciate your time.
I'm happy to be here and I'm thankful for the time to be able to talk about this. It's been a wonderful experience, guys. Awesome.
And I know that it's almost midnight there. So if you do need to drop off, I'm just going to say our goodbyes and go on. But we'll keep an eye out for other updates for DA667 on Twitter. So cool.
All right, gentlemen. Well, thank you very much for your time, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys soon.
Okay. All right. See you later, Tony.
All right. Take
Bye.
care.
All right. Later. All right. So, Mr. Betcher, tell us about LogMD before we go.
Well, as mentioned before, LogMD is a malicious discovery tool for Windows systems. I use it in my lab. It's the primary tool there that I use to figure out what malware did and how it did it. And so you can look more about it at log-md.com.
Very cool. All right. And you're on Twitter at Betcherpwned, BOETTCHERPWNED.
You got it.
Yep. Ms. Berlin, of course, you can find her on Twitter at InfoSister, INFOSYSTIR. She has a couple of things going on because it's Mental Health Awareness Month and Suicide Prevention Month. We are definitely wanting to highlight Hackers Health, which is her nonprofit that she works with some other folks in the infosec community to do workshops, destigmatizing and bringing awareness to mental health issues. You can find her Twitter for that on Hackers Health on Twitter. And she also does tabletop exercises for organizations. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can go to InfoSec Roleplay and, get your company to do an InfoSec role-playing game, very similar to Clerics and Caverns, very similar company out there, denizens and demons is whatever's with all the roll 20s and die 20s and all that stuff, and broadswords and stuff. So yeah, I'm failing miserably at that at the analogies there. I think everybody understands what that's about. Appreciate the need for awareness of mental health, and glad that Ms. Berlin is bringing awareness to that to our community. Breaksec on Twitter is our official podcast, and you can follow me at Brian Break on Twitter as well. We have a nonprofit education foundation that our podcast and our local meetup is under CSEC East, and so I am the president of that, and I also co-organize InfoSec Campout, which is another conference that we're doing on a yearly basis. We're still working. We already have all the venue for that, so we're working on workshops and items. So if you have an idea for a workshop, 26 through 28 of August 2022, we might want to talk to you. We can guarantee you a camping spot. You can come and hang out with us outdoors, and enjoy the great outdoors, and show people how to hack things, or talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about. So InfoSec Campout is that on Twitter. So I think that's it. Thank you to our Patreon supporters. I do appreciate you. We are working on some ways to make supporting our show and our educational initiatives and our conferences a little more appealing to our Patreon users. I'm actually looking at doing a Discord with specific channels for our Patreon users. Content where like you get early access to all the interviews and other content like that. So if anybody from our Patreon has ideas, I'd love to hear them, and we'll see what we can do to make that a thing. So thank you to our Patreon supporters for the monetary efforts for Zoom domain hosting in front registration and paying for community creation, which Mr. Betcher and I and Ms. Berlin do quite a bit of. So I appreciate the vote of confidence from those folks. BreakingSecurity.com is our website. So if you're looking for almost 400 episodes of content and plenty of CPEs out there if you need them for your certifications, those are available. So I think that's it for this week. Have a great week. Be kind to one another. Stay bundled up and masked up, and go get your vaccinations, please, and wash your hands, you nasties, and take care of yourself. Because as we always say here, you're the only you have. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.